Rip off and duplicate, okay? It's what makes the world go round. Rip off and duplicate. So I'm going to give you all about a 5-minute break, and then anybody who's interested in coming back for the buyer contracts class, we'll start in 5 minutes.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, lady, give us a little message. Oh, I turned off the sound there. Okay. All right. Today, we're going to go through the basic forms that you need to use when submitting an offer representing a buyer. So the first one we're going to look at is the information about brokerage services. When should this form be presented to your client? First substantial contact. That doesn't mean when you're writing the offer. And if you ever get a TREC complaint filed against you, or if TREC investigates you for any reason on a transaction, doesn't matter what the issue is, the first thing they're going to look at is the date on the IABS and the date of the actual offer. And if those are the same date, you're going to have some splaining to do, because that just means you presented them this the same day you made an offer on a property for them, and that is rarely the first substantive contact. So when you start interacting with them, you need to present this and get them to initial it. If that first substantive conversation is online, say it's via email, then it's very simple. You simply say, look at the link above my name and my signature where it says information about brokerage services, open that up, print it, initial it, and scan it back to me. And if for any reason they refuse to do that, and this often happens, you want to go ahead and print a copy and write on it in your own handwriting, present it to clients on this date. Client refused to initial, put their name in there, then put your initials. And that way you have written contemporaneous documentation that you presented it to them at first substantive conversation. Make sense? Any questions about that? By the way, where do they, yes?
Is it, I noticed it's also in Spanish. Is it valid in Spanish?
Yes, it's valid in Spanish. Where do they sign? Where does the client sign the IABS? Now, Bob, the broker, speaks up. Yeah, if you look at the bottom, there is no place for them to sign. They merely initial at the bottom. And that's not just me being picky. I'm making a point. If they were signing, this would be more of a contract or an agreement. The fact that it just asks for their initials is an indication that we're just wanting them to acknowledge receipt. And you can use that language if they hesitate, like, I don't even know you. You know, why am I going to sign something with you? I haven't even met you face to face. You can back off and say, you know what, I'm not asking you to sign anything. This document does not create a relationship between us at all. No obligations are begun. In fact, all it asks for is your initials at the bottom, which is your acknowledgement that I presented this form and offered to explain it to you. Okay? Yes, Bob?
Why are the buyer and the seller in the document form either?
I don't know. Yeah, Bob asked a question, why is there a buyer and a seller IABS? I was unaware they have two separate ones. Have you looked at them to see if they're any different?
I haven't. I was just thinking maybe you got to do both sides of the deal, but you're still working on the same client.
Yeah.
Now I'm in zip form because you're in the farm.
So let's look at the IABS for a moment and make sure that you understand it. This is simply a document that explains the types of way a client can relate to an agent in the state of Texas. Okay, who can repeat that back? What does the IABS do, lady? Come on. It explains the various ways that a client can relate to an agent in the state of Texas. Okay? It describes the different ways that I can help you. Okay? Different levels of service that I can provide to you. So let's just go through them very quickly. The types of real estate license holders could be a broker or a sales agent. Both are licensed in the state of Texas to assist real estate clients. A broker's minimum duties required by law, and this applies to the broker and the sales agent. It applies to both, okay? Put the interest of the client above all others, including the broker's own interests. Inform the client of any material information about the property or transaction received by the broker. And by the way, that includes even if the seller doesn't want the information to be known. As a real estate professional, if you become aware of a material fact regarding the property and the seller's trying to hide it, you can't hide behind their hiding. You are under a legal obligation to disclose that information, even if your client, the seller, doesn't want you to. And if you hide it like they did, then you are a party to a criminal act just as they are. So you fulfill your duty even if they don't. Answer the client's questions and present any offer to or counter offer from the client, and treat all parties to a real estate transaction honestly and fairly. All parties, even if you don't represent them. Now let me pause just a moment on presenting all offers and counter offers. Have you ever presented an offer or a counter offer and just heard crickets on the other end? No response? There's no time period specified, but the assumption is that you're presenting these in a timely manner. And if for any reason you feel like the listing agent is not presenting your offer to the seller, there's a form that you can use, which requires that listing agent to present to the seller acknowledging their receipt of your offer. And we rarely have to use that, but in some cases we do. So if you're in a situation where you feel like, that listing agent is playing games with you, send them that form signed by your buyer. They will have to respond to it, okay? Evidence, search the keyword evidence. I believe it's something along the lines of evidence of presentation of offer, okay? Evidence. A license holder can represent a party in a real estate transaction. These are the various ways that an agent can relate to a client in Texas. First of all, as agent for the owner or the seller, landlord, as agent for buyer or tenant, and that means there's a contractual relationship where you're representing their best interests. An agent for both, intermediary. Is this called dual agency? No, we do not have dual agency. Dual agency got many people in trouble. It disadvantaged clients because there was a presumption that the agent was representing each client at full service levels, which is absolutely impossible. You cannot be loyal to two people with competing interests. So there is no dual agency in Texas. Instead, we have intermediary. Now, in intermediary, who is representing the seller? Okay, that's kind of a tricky question. The broker's agent, right? In intermediary, who is representing the buyer? An agent from the same broker. So intermediary occurs when there is one broker representing both parties. Now, under that one broker, it could be one agent. And we call that a level 1 intermediary. This happens when you, as the listing agent, also get the buyer. Does that ever happen? We hope it happens all the time, right? That's right. It's why we promote those listings. It's why we put our cell number on the sign. We want those buyers to call us. Who else is in a better position to sell the listing? We know all about it. If we represent both seller and buyer, we're a level 1 intermediary. But there's also a level 2. And that's where one agent, let's say it's Kevin, represents the seller, but someone else under the same agency, say Jeanette represents the buyer, but you're both EXP agents. So it's still intermediary, but it's level 2 because there's 2 agents. Under level 1, where there's 1 agent, there are very limited duties. This is not full representation. And there are no pledges of loyalty to either side. And to explain that, you'll see the bullet points right there. It's very limited service. But at a level 2, where the broker appoints an agent to each side, then each agent can represent just like you were in a non-intermediary situation. You've got confidentiality, you've got loyalty, you can negotiate the best deal for your client. So my advice to you, whenever possible in an intermediary situation, go to level 2. Even if you're the listing agent and you pick up a buyer prospect, I would recommend you refer out that buyer prospect to another agent in the room, another agent within our company. It'll be a level 2 intermediary. You can pick up a referral fee from that. Now you're not going to get both sides of the transaction, but you'll get all of one and a piece of the other, and your chances of being sued are dramatically less. Your chances of getting repeat and referral business are dramatically more. And that's because it's almost impossible to get to the end of a level 1 intermediary situation and have everybody happy. It's human nature. Each side is, because you're not serving them at a very high level, they presume that you're serving the other side at a high level to their disadvantage. It's almost impossible for them not to believe that. So it's by far better, short-term and long-term, for each party to have their own representative. Yes, Letty? Yes. Yes. So yes, if 2 neighbors agree that they're going to buy and sell to each other, but they need an agent to help them. So it could be intermediary, but what establishes the intermediary relationship? Representation. You represent whom? Both parties. That's the point. It is possible for you to represent the seller and the buyer be unrepresented. That could happen in that situation. It's also possible for an agent to not represent either party. So in a situation where the neighbors already negotiate the deal, they just need somebody to help with paperwork, then you can do a fee for service and represent nobody. Intermediary only occurs when you represent both parties, or agents under the same brokerage represent both parties. So what is a sub-agent? Have you heard that expression before? When you put a listing in the MLS, it's going to ask you, or when you take a listing, fill out a listing agreement with your seller, what are you going to do to compensate sub-agents? How much money are you offering to them? And as an Abbey broker, I always said 0. I don't know what EXP's policy is. It's probably 0 as well. A sub-agent is when somebody brings the listing broker an offer from a buyer. An agent brings an offer from a buyer, but they don't represent that buyer. If they don't represent the buyer, who by default do they represent? The seller by default. So now the listing broker is legally responsible for the activities of that sub-agent, and the listing broker may not even know that agent. So it creates an incredible level of liability for the broker. So most brokerages do not allow their agents to compensate sub-agents. If you want to present an offer on our listing on behalf of a buyer, doggone it, you better represent the buyer. Get a buyer rep agreement. And that way we know who we're dealing with. And we're not responsible for your actions. Your broker's going to be responsible. Okay? To avoid disputes, all agreements between you and a broker should be in writing and clearly establish the broker's duties and who will pay the broker for services. Okay? License holder contact information, all that's found below. Okay? By the way, I'm no longer your supervisor. I am no longer your broker. Go into HAR dashboard search box, type in IABS, and you will find a completed IABS form with your new broker's name and all his contact information. Okay? Yep, Tony King. Yes, sir.
When you look at a listing, it says
Yes. So this is something HAR put into place about a year ago. It allows two agents under the same brokerage to co-list. This is typically done in a team scenario where you have the team leader and a team member who are both co-listing agents. And by the way, it's very advantageous to do that because when the property closes, you don't each get half credit for a transaction. You each get a full credit. So each of you, it will show in your sales history to the public on HAR that you listed this home that sold. So it's always good to do that if you can. You get half of what? Half of the deal. What do you mean half of the deal? No, be clear, be clear. What do you mean when you say you get half the deal? You're talking about the commission. Okay, that is governed completely separately from the co-listing on the HAR. What governs your commission? The broker? So the listing agreement determines, it identifies there how the listing broker, who they are going to compensate, okay? And then your contract with the broker further provides those details. In a co-listing situation, it could be that the team leader gets all the commissions and the team member gets nothing. Or the team member gets everything and the team leader gets nothing. Or you could split it 50-50, or you could split it 75-25. What is your agreement with the co-listing agent? Okay, so it doesn't necessarily dictate that. All right, that is the IABS. Any questions?
How do you like to present it? What are some styles of presenting?
Yeah, so how do you present it? So the way you should do it, and I will just be honest and say I often forget to do this. So I'm a human agent just like most of you. But what you typically, it's going to be when you show up at the first showing. And just bring a copy with you. Now you remember, if you follow my strategy on showings, you've brought a list of property descriptions of everything you're going to show, and you've got them in order of showing, and you've got the times written up in the right-hand corner and all of that. You just put the IBS right on top of that. And when you meet with them at the first house and you say, here's our schedule for today, this is my copy, this is your copy. Oh, by the way, I've put this information about brokerage services on top. This is a document that the Texas Real Estate Commission requires that we present to every person that we work with. Doesn't create any relationship or obligation between us, but it describes the various ways that an agent can relate to a client in the state of Texas. I'm happy to discuss it with you in any level of detail, but if you would initial at the bottom, I would appreciate it. That will be your acknowledgement that I presented it to you. That's the way it should be done most of the time. Yep, two copies. That way they get one and you get one for your records. Okie dokies. So let's keep moving on here. Let's go back, and I'm going to look up the next document in terms of buyer representation. And if I type in the word family, what am I looking for? Looky, there it is. See how easy this is? Find documents. 1-to-4 family residential contract. Who knows what the 1-to-4 means? Why is it called the 1-to-4 family? Yeah, so this covers single family, duplex, triplex, quadplex. Is that what you call a fourplex, or just a fourplex? Okay, but anything above a 4, you're probably into a commercial property contract now. But if it's one of those 1, 2s, 3s, or 4 units, you can put it on the residential contract. Okay. All right. This is the form that you're going to complete to present an offer on behalf of your buyer. Okay. Number 1, the parties. This identifies who these people are. Who is the buyer and who is the seller. Now, typically, you know who your buyer is, but how do you know who the seller is? It's typically not in the listing description. Now, I will say this, I think a really good agent is going to provide that information. And you may not want to put their name in private agent remarks, but you could simply say in private agent remarks on the listing, contact listing agent for offer assistance information. And in that, you can have the names of the sellers. You can even put in there the names of their attorney if they're represented. You can put in there their contact information so that the buyer's agent can put that into the offer for legal notices. You can also put in there the name of your preferred title company, okay? All that on the offer assistance document. Yes?
I was just gonna say, you can just click on the tax number in the listing. And
Yep.
that pops up.
Oh, fantastic. So Nancy says you can click on the tax number in the listing and the seller info will pop up. Now, let me just mention, this is just kind of a little bit higher level issue, but I wrote an offer over the weekend and I used this strategy. I put in my buyer names, you know, Jim Cole and Nancy Cole, and then I added this little verbiage afterwards, and or assigns. And I did that because they weren't quite sure if they were going to complete the purchase in their own name or if their parents were going to buy the home for them and then just gift it to them. That was in play. We didn't know. That and or assigns is used on almost every contract, offer contract involving an investor client, because they'll often make an offer in their own name, but if it gets accepted, then they're either going to want to put it into the name of an LLC that they create just for that property, or if they're a wholesaler, they may want to flip that contract to someone else who's actually going to rehab and sell the property. So you, by simply adding and, slash, or assigns, you give the buyer the ability to assign that purchase contract to another person or entity. Make sense? And the parties, yes. Where it says and buyer, Jim Smith and Nancy Smith and or assigned. You write that in there, okay? Property, paragraph 2. What doggone it are we buying here? That's where we describe it. The land, improvements, and accessories are collectively referred to as the property. That's very important. Don't skip over that. The land, the improvements, and the accessories. What are we buying? We're buying the land, the improvements, and the accessories. And then you describe it legally. Lot, block. You put in the name of the neighborhood, the addition, the city, the county, and then known as. What do you put in the known as line? The address, right? 123 Elm Street, after you've given it a legal description. Now it describes here what is meant by improvements and accessories. And this is critically important because we've just said this is what they're buying. Most agents are unaware of what's in this paragraph. So let's look at it. What are the improvements? It's the house, the garage, now we know that. An improvement is basically, think about the raw land and anything that's been done to develop it, to improve the land. So house, garage, other fixtures and improvements attached to the above described real property, including without limitation the following permanently installed and built-in items: equipment and appliances, valances, screens, shutters, awnings, wall-to-wall carpeting, mirrors, ceiling fans, attic fans, mailboxes, television antennas, mounts and brackets for televisions and speakers, heating and air conditioning units, security and fire detection equipment, wiring, plumbing, lighting fixtures, chandeliers, water softener system. You will not be in this business very long before you sell a home with a water softener, and when you show up for the final walkthrough, guess what's missing? The water softener. So does the buyer have a right to claim that water softener? It just says right here, that's what they bought. So unless it was excluded, it should be there. Kitchen equipment, garage door openers, cleaning equipment, shrubbery, landscaping, outdoor cooking equipment, and any other property attached to the above described real property. Why would they have to say shrubbery? Some people want to take their landscaping. Well, I had a couple that had a legit reason. They had a lemon tree in the backyard and it was their gift to each other for their 5th anniversary. They wanted to take it to their new home. So if they want that lemon tree, what has to happen? You go right down here to paragraph D, exclusions, and you write in lemon tree in the backyard. Okay, yes, sir.
For cooking, you've got a grill that's plugged in because he's getting gas.
Yes. Yes, it is attached. Yes. Yeah, if you have a grill and it's attached to the home as a gas feed and you want to take it with you, you need to exclude it. Okay, an argument could be made there. Even if you push it around on wheels, if you've attached it like that, it could go either way. So you definitely would want to clear it up. Yep. Okie dokies. Let's see what anything else here people fight over. Chandeliers. I had almost literally a knockdown drag out over a chandelier, and a husband and a boyfriend had to physically restrain a woman, the seller, from attacking the buyer over the chandelier. The seller had taken it down and the buyer was threatening to walk because, hey, I wanted that beautiful chandelier in the dining room and now there's nothing but a hole in the ceiling. Okay. No, there is no embellishment. So the lady was doing this, I mean, literally, and the husband on one side and the boyfriend on the other, physically restraining her because that was her grandma's chandelier and no buyer was going to get it. And so the buyer was so incensed by this, she left. Like, okay, you can keep the chandelier and the house, and then literally, finally, the boyfriend and the father raced back. This was up on Lake Livingston. We were closing here in the Woodlands. They had to race up there and reinstall the chandelier, and then the title company convinced the buyer to come back, and we ended up closing the thing. But yeah, it was a knockdown, drag out. Oh, he was beautiful. Yeah, it was real crystal. So accessories, these are included in the sale. Window, air conditioning unit, stove, fireplace screens. Did you know most people aren't aware of that? Sellers want to take those fancy screens with them. If it's not excluded, it has to stay. Curtains and rods, blinds, window shades, draperies and rods, door keys, mailbox keys, above ground pool. Here's another one, swimming pool equipment and maintenance accessories. Those little skimmers that you walk around getting the leaves out, the little robot that cleans, all that is presumed to stay. It's an accessory. Oh, here's another one people fight over all the time, artificial fireplace logs. And when you pay $1,000 to install artificial fireplace logs, and then you get a transfer move 6 months later, what do you want to do? Take them with you. But if you do that, you better exclude it, okay? And controls for garage doors, entry gates, other improvements and accessories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just be aware of this. And I would go over in a listing conversation, bring a copy of the offer document and go offer it. Say, when somebody makes an offer on your property, these are the things they're expecting to buy. Is there anything in this improvements and accessories list that you want to retain? We need to go ahead and put it in here in paragraph D, and then I'll mention that in the MLS remarks, and we'll make sure that our final contract reflects that. Yes, sir.
So, a lot of information.
Yes.
And do you suggest that the agent sit with the client?
Seller.
And go over all of it, or can you say, you need to go over this information?
Yeah.
And I'll call you back in an hour or two.
Yeah.
What's the better approach?
So it sometimes depends on the client. Some of them are not going to read anything in advance. They want you to sit at their kitchen table and explain it to them. And others don't want to sit at the kitchen table at all. They're on the go, they're flying, they're ripping and roaring, and they want to do everything electronically. With them, you could send a document like this over with the seller's disclosure and other notices that you need them to complete in advance and just have them review it. I would still ask them the question, did you see the accessories and improvements list, is there anything in there that you're going to retain? Or if you noticed anything in your walkthrough that you thought might be of something they want to retain, you can ask them about that specifically. Okay? Correct.
So, let's say some of this stuff is not okay with me, and they're okay, does the listing agent have to rewrite it?
Yeah, so what happens, well, yes, everything is negotiable, but what I'm saying is, as a listing agent, you want to have this conversation with your seller, put the information on the MLS so that the buyer's agent, when they're writing this offer, they can put the exclusions in the offer. Okay, so there is a document, a separate document that can be used to an addendum to the contract where you list all the exclusions. But if it's just a couple things like chandelier and dining room, the seller can communicate that to the listing broker. The listing broker can communicate that in private agent remarks or offer instructions that they provide to buyer agents, and then the buyer agent can put the exclusions right here in the offer. And that way the seller knows, they understand we're keeping the chandelier. Okay. So that's high level right there. If you think that the buyer's going to fall in love with it and you don't want an argument over it, you don't want a negotiation over it, pull it down, put up a Home Depot chandelier, and away you go. Okay. All right. Reservations. Any reservation for oil, gas, or other minerals, water, timber, or other interests is made in accordance with an attached addendum. Quick question. Do the mineral rights by default go to the buyer or remain with the seller? I haven't heard the right answer yet. Belong to who, Jorge? I still have not heard the right. Okay, listen carefully. Listen carefully. Any reservation for oil, gas, or other minerals, water, timber, or other interests is made in accordance with a separate attached addendum. What does that tell you? Read that and understand that. What does that mean? Nope. Nope. It's not that complicated. What this is saying is the mineral rights are being sold with the property. Any rights that are actually owned by the buyer. Now, somebody said some previous developer probably has them. They were probably issued with a Spanish land grant back in the 1600s. But what this says is kind of like a special warranty deed. If I own any mineral rights, I'm giving them to you with the sale of the property. This is what that says. And if you want to do something different, if the seller wants to retain rights, it has to be done. You reserve those rights. You retain those rights with a separate addendum. And there's an addendum for that, mineral rights addendum. But the simple answer is the buyer gets them. If the seller has them, they go with the property. Got it? What if this is a 400-acre ranch and the mineral rights are very important to the seller or the buyer, and we're not actually sure who has them? Who do you contact to find out? Title company would be an easy answer if we're talking about a subdivision property. A landman is the answer. Oil companies hire these people all the time. It's a specialized profession where they do the work, similar work to a title company, but they could go much, much deeper and much further back. And this is the only thing they do, is establish who owns the mineral rights on a property. So on a large property, it would be worth hiring a landman if the minerals.
What's the name?
Landman. Yeah, it's a landman. That, yeah, the whole. So they'll be called land persons at some point, but right now, even the ladies are called a landman. Okay.
That's only if it's in question, because a lot of the things I've seen is like mineral rights are not being conveyed.
No, they are being conveyed. That's my point.
Specifically they say in the listing, mineral rights are not conveyed, so that, does that nip that in the bud?
If, you mean if you put that in the contract?
No, I'm shopping for land, acreage, and it says in the listing, mineral rights are not conveyed. So I'm just buying the land and the mineral rights remain with the seller.
So are you talking about a different contract than what we're looking at? This is an offer. So this is an offer contract for a 1-to-4 residential dwelling. And it says right here that the mineral rights convey unless they've been reserved by separate addendum. Now, a farm and ranch contract, I believe, is exactly the same. I believe the language is exactly the same, but we'll look at that in a farm and ranch class.
So it says they're separate addendum. So if the seller knows they already belong to somebody, are we required to send that?
No, all this says is whatever rights belong to the seller convey to the buyer. But the seller makes no representation as to what those rights are. Do they have the water rights? Do they have the oil rights? Do they have the timber rights? They don't have to say. They're just saying whatever I have goes with the property. Okay, whatever that is. And in most cases, it's nothing. But if there is something, it goes. Okay, did you learn something yet?
Yeah, landman.
There you go, landman. Landman. Well, that's a profession. There's a lot of them in Texas. I don't know if it's licensed or not. Yep. I don't think it is. Sale price, number 3. The cash portion of the sales price payable by buyer at closing is blank. Then, how much financing is involved? Is it going to be third party? Is it going to be a loan assumption? Is it going to be seller financing? You put in the amount, you add A and B, and it equals what? The sale price. That's right, C. The contract sale price. So make sure the math adds up. And if you're using the form in one of our electronic platforms, it will force the math to work out. It'll let you know if you've got something wrong. All right, leases. Except as disclosed in this contract, seller is not aware of any leases affecting the property. After the effective date, seller may not, without buyer's written consent, create a new lease, amend any existing lease, or convey any interest in the property. Okay, so if this property is being leased, once we go under sale contract, the seller can't go in and change the terms. That lease agreement must be, a copy must be provided to the buyer, and that's what this says down below. Residential leases, fixture leases, natural resource leases, the seller has to provide all that documentation to the buyer. And once we go under contract, seller, you can't change it. Because the value of the property in large parts depends upon the terms of these leases. So they must remain the same. That's what that says. Any questions there? All right, number 5.
Are those like solar system leases, any kind of lease?
Yeah, that would fall under fixture lease. Yeah, or water softener lease. Yeah, things like that. Number 5, earnest money and termination option. So we've got the earnest money and the option fee together in paragraph 5. And I'm going to give you all a break in about 5 minutes. So if you got your legs crossed, you just hang in there. We're almost ready, okay? A delivery of earnest money and option fee within 3 days after the effective date, buyer must deliver to blank as escrow agent at, and there's their address, this amount of money as earnest money and this amount as the option fee. The earnest money and option fee shall be made payable to the escrow agent and may be paid separately or combined in a single payment. By the way, when it says escrow agent, are we talking about a company or a person? I love it when we all get the answer right. And that is exactly right. Michael clarified this for us in our workplace conversation just a couple days ago. An agent asked a question, Michael answered it beautifully. So you'll put in there Momentum Title, Envision Title, Sugar Creek Title, whatever it is. Now, high level, I think you should put the person's name also. They're not technically the escrow agent, but Momentum Title, comma, Denzel Dixon or whatever. And that way they'll know to the attention of if the contract shows up without his name on it somewhere. Okay, put it. Well, technically it's the company, Momentum Title. I'm saying you can also add the person's name if you have it, if you know it, okay? So let's say we have earnest money of 3,000, option money of 300. How many checks do we need? One is all we need. We could do two, but one is sufficient because they're both being made payable to whom? To the title company. Very good. I get lots of questions about paragraph 5.1. Buyer shall deliver additional money of blank to escrow agent within so many days after the effective date of the contract. What do you put in there? Generally, nothing. Yes, it's rare that there's going to be a second earnest money deposit. When I have seen these situations, it's typically where the buyer is a little cash tight at the moment, but they're expecting a paycheck, a bonus, with 401k withdrawal in a couple weeks. And so we may put down $1,500 now, we'll get you the other $1,500 in 10 days, that kind of thing. That's where you could use that, okay? If the last day to deliver the earnest money, option fee, or additional earnest money falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the time to deliver the earnest money option fee or the additional earnest money as applicable is extended until the end of the next day that's not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. All right, let's figure this out. Your contract effective date is Wednesday. When is the option money and earnest money due? And let's say there's no legal holidays. Effective date is Wednesday. What's the deadline for delivery? So why are you saying Thursday?
Because as soon as possible.
No. How many days do you have, Nancy? Count the days. No, your effective date is Wednesday. When do you begin counting?
Thursday, Friday.
The next day. So when is the deadline for delivery? Help her out. Monday. Listen, you weren't listening to me. If the third day falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the deadline for delivery is extended to the next day, which is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So if Wednesday is your effective date, when is the deadline for delivery? Monday. What if Monday's a federal holiday? Then Tuesday. I think you're getting it. Yes.
If the third day falls on the day after Thanksgiving.
With-
That's not a legal holiday,
Yes.
but title companies are closed.
So I'm going with Annie's answer. The next day. Get it in one day. Don't wait. Get it in the same day. Okay. Yeah. Don't take a chance. Yeah. So these deadlines are structured for delivery to a title company. And that's why the deadline for delivery is 5 p.m. They're presumed to close. It's why weekends and federal holidays don't count, because the title company is presumed to be closed. So I would say if there's a disaster and the title company is closed, the courts would look upon that as everybody's going to have to agree to an extension and a deadline, even if the contract doesn't say it. Courts are designed to follow generally common sense, and that would be common sense. We couldn't deliver it, okay? Or take a picture of yourself, putting it in the Dropbox, at the title company, okay? So by the way, that's not really an excuse any longer, because most of the title companies do have an app where these deposits can be made electronically. So check with your title company and they'll probably have a solution when you can't travel or when they're closed or whatever, that you can still transfer the funds in. Okay? All right, very good. By the way, what if the effective date is a Friday? When is the deadline for delivery? Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's it. That's the point. Saturdays and Sundays and legal holidays are of no impact whatsoever unless the third day falls on one of them. So if Friday's the effective date, you count Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Monday's the deadline, unless it's a legal holiday. Okay? All right, I think y'all got that. Very, very good.
So most people just get the check right then, or you really have to wait.
No, we don't want you waiting until the third day. That's the deadline for delivery. Get them there right there, or use the electronic app. Now, you definitely need to counsel your buyers about the importance of this deadline. It does. Now, by the way, if they don't meet the deadline, say for earnest money delivery, is the contract null and void? Is it canceled automatically? So the buyer is in default of the contract because they didn't meet the deadline, but that doesn't cancel the contract, okay? It gives the seller a right to cancel the contract, but they are not required to, okay? What happens if the option money is not delivered by the deadline? Does that cancel the contract? Does it give the seller a right to cancel the contract? They lose the option what? Period. If they don't deliver the option money by the third day, they simply do not have an option period. That's the only consequence. So they had a 7-day option period in the contract, or a 10-day in which they were going to have inspections and negotiate repairs. Well, guess what? They can still have inspections and they can still try to negotiate repairs, but they have no leverage against the seller, because an option period gives them the right to cancel that contract, walk away, and get their earnest money back. Does the seller want that to happen? Not usually. So they'll negotiate with the buyer on reasonable repairs. But if there's no option period, that seller's going to dig their heels in and said, you submitted us an as-is contract. Well, guess what? You're buying it as is. This happened to me exactly when I sold my condo last May. The buyer, who was unrepresented, and she knew I was an agent, and I told her in writing, these are the deadlines for delivery of the checks. She did not meet the deadline. She had her inspection. She submitted us with a long list of repairs. And I said, I'm sorry, there is no option period. And the house was perfectly fine for us. It's going to be perfectly fine for you. Okay? Any of these repairs you want, you're welcome to make them after closing. That's exactly what happened, because she did not deliver the option money on time by the deadline. Okay? Yes? No, the seller's not required to cancel the contract. It's just going to continue rocking along. There simply won't be any credit of earnest money back to the buyer at closing because it was never delivered. Okay, now let's talk about that, the seller's right to cancel. So by the third day, the earnest money is not delivered. Does the seller have the right to cancel? Yes, they have the right, not the obligation, but they can cancel the contract if they wish to. When do they lose that right? When the earnest money is delivered to the title company. So if the earnest money is delivered on day 6, there was a 3-day period in which the seller could have canceled. But because they didn't, when it is delivered on the 6th, then the seller loses that right. Okay? All right. And all that is described down in paragraphs 5C and D. Look at paragraph E, 5E, time. Time is of the essence for this paragraph, and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. You will only see that phrase in this contract 2 or 3 times. And what it means is, we mean it. If you miss this deadline, there are consequences. Okay? When you see time is of the essence, alarm bells better go ring off. We don't want to miss it. Now, let me tell you where this comes up most often. It's in regard to the closing date. And I had this discussion last night with agents and loan officers. I don't know, I was getting bombarded by emails and text messages, and I didn't know if it was the same property situation or they're working on separate ones. If the buyer, let's say that they fail to get financing, that their lender's not ready by the closing date and they have to delay by 2 or 3 days, can the seller cancel the contract and keep the earnest money? So technically the buyer is in default because they did not meet the closing date. But that does not mean the seller can cancel the contract and keep the earnest money. You know why? Because this phrase does not appear in the contract in relationship to the closing date. Time is not of the essence when it comes to the closing date. The courts have consistently held that the closing date is a good faith target. And if either party, for reasonable reasons, has to delay for a few days, both parties are expected to cooperate. Now, what's reasonable? That's what people fight with. If it's a few days, the seller better cooperate. If it's a couple weeks, now that may not be reasonable and the seller may have the right of cancellation, but there may be a fight over it. Okay? But
what if it's like a new construction, for instance, and it's, a month after?
So the question is, what is if it's new construction? Read the new construction contract and it will tell you that builder is not bound to any closing date.
It's 2, well, with Lennar, they said 2 years.
2 years, yes. So my contract said we were probably going to close in July, and we closed in mid-December. My son, we're building a house for him in Wichita Falls. We went under contract in March of last year, trying to get them in by August when he was transferred to Wichita Falls. They're still not in their house, and they're saying now it's going to be a couple more months. That's going to be 12 months to build a 2,400 square foot home. So
Does the buyer have any way out?
no. Well, read the contract. No, I mean that sincerely. I'm not being sarcastic. If it's a builder contract, it's their own contract. Their attorneys wrote it. It's not a promulgated form, typically. So you have to read it to see what your rights are. You know what my new build contract said? The builder can cancel the contract at any time for any reason. Give us our money back plus $500. You know why they put that in there? Because they don't want to take any flack from you as the buyer. And we were giving them flack. And you know what they said to us? Shall we just cancel this contract and walk away? Because they had the right to do it, and they got about $100,000 of appreciation in the year it took them to build it. They would have been delighted to cancel that contract and sell it to somebody else. So if you're representing a new home buyer, read the contract. Okay, let's pause right there. It's 11:03. We'll take a 5-minute break and regroup in 5 minutes.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right, title policy. This is an area that does show up as a negotiation point a little bit in these conversations. 6A, seller shall furnish to buyer at whose expense? Seller or buyer, an owner title insurance policy issued by blank in the amount of the sale price. By the way, what is the title policy designed to do? Do you think a buyer or seller might be interested in that since they're going to be paying sometimes multiple thousands of dollars for it?
Somebody coming back from, from way in the past to say that they own the property.
The title policy, you're very close there. The title policy, it's an insurance policy where the title company promises to defend the buyer's right of ownership. So if there is any challenge to that ownership, the title company is going to get in front of the buyer and say, bring it on. We got attorneys. We're going to fight for the buyer and protect their rights. Why would they feel comfortable doing that? Because they have done their work. They've done a title search and they've looked to see if there are any other claims upon that property. And let's say that there was a claim, maybe an HVAC vendor who installed a new air conditioner unit was never paid. How would the title company know about that? The vendor would have gone to court and filed a mechanic's lien against the property. And when the title company sees that, what are they going to require to happen prior to or at closing? That's right. It gets paid off and the lien released, because they're not going to offer to defend when they know there's already a problem. So they're going to clean up any problems and then issue this title policy to defend the buyer's right. Okay. Now this is where this often shows up. And it's one of those things that just irritate me when I see it. I want to strangle listing agents. I saw it today on a listing. The listing agent will say something like this: if seller pays OTP, then use XYZ title company, as if the seller paying the owner's title policy premium gives them the right to dictate the choice of the title company. I don't know where these myths come from, but they're everywhere in real estate. And this is one that is more common probably than any other. That's exactly what I'm saying. Who chooses the title company is a matter of negotiation. By law, there's only one scenario where one party gets to arbitrarily choose the title company. And that is if the buyer pays OTP and lender policy. Owner policy and lender policy. If the buyer pays both, the law states the buyer can choose the title company. It under no circumstances gives the seller the right to dictate the choice of title company. Listing agents don't know that. So you might have to educate them. And when they argue with you, say, hey, do me a favor, call the TAR legal hotline. Here's the number, and ask the attorney. And they'll be happy to explain it to you. Okay? Now, I understand why listing agents want to choose the title company, but they don't have a right to dictate it. And I would encourage you, negotiate for your preferred title company, but do that by putting it as the listing agent in your offer assistance instructions. We would prefer, not require, XYZ title company, Bobby Smith, escrow agent, email address, phone number, address, but do not try to dictate those terms. It's not your right, not the seller's right. Okay? All right, let's keep rolling. So, no, that's not true, because what I'm describing is the Texas Real Estate Commission rules regarding represented buyers and sellers. Okay, in a private party transaction, and a builder's sale is often a private party transaction because the builder is also the seller and they are very likely unrepresented in the transaction. They're representing themselves. Okay. But even then, the builder will often try to incentivize the buyer to freely work with their title company and their lender. They do that by offering incentives. Use our lender and we will pay the owner's title premium. That's typically what you're going to see. Okay? And they have the right to do that because if they were a real estate agent, they would not have the right to do that. Why do they have the right to do that? To dictate terms. because they're a principal in the transaction. The buyer and the seller can put any kind of requirements or stipulations they want in there, typically, with some limitations, whereas we as real estate agents can't. Okay?
It doesn't, whenever I've been putting in contracts, I can find that money is anything about that, and even trying to talk to my clients and, paying for it, because isn't that a way that they will look at it and say, well, no, they're not using my title company, so I'd rather choose this one over here, so I don't have to drive over the source, so I don't have to.
Yeah, choice of title company in this market. If I'm presenting an offer on a property, I'm calling up the listing agent and I'm saying, hey, I'm drafting the offer. What is your preferred title company? Right? Even though I would prefer to use mine, I'm trying to accommodate the listing agent because I want my offer to be very attractive. In a more normal market where the buyer has, some negotiating power and I'm a buyer's agent, I'm writing that offer with my preferred title company in there. Because I know by law, the listing agent's required to present the offer and the seller doesn't care. The seller doesn't care, and they usually don't have 3 or 4 offers, so they're going to take my offer. Okay, so you always have to judge your position by your power and adjust accordingly.
I'm curious what the advantages are of a service-specific title company.
So what's the advantage of getting your title company? Better service. And I have had nightmare experiences with title companies who knew they were never going to work with me again. They didn't care. They wouldn't cooperate. Sometimes they didn't even care about the closing date. You want a title company that knows you're going to be their #1 source of business for the next 5 years. And doggone it, they'll do backflips to help you and your client. And if you want to close on Friday, the last day of the month, and they're already double booked, guess what they're going to do? They're going to make their escrow agent stay late. And they're going to take care of you. That's the kind of service you want. And that's what you get when you are a primary source of business to one company. Okay, let's go down here to paragraph 6, subsection 8, the standard printed exception. Y'all see it right there? 6A8. The standard printed exception as to discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in area, or boundary lines, encroachments, or protrusions, or overlapping improvements, and now you have 2 options to finish that sentence, will not be amended or deleted from the title policy. That's an option. Or will be amended to read shortages in area at the expense of the buyer or seller. Wow. Somebody tell me what that means. Oh, yeah. Okay, Annie, what does that mean?
So if a fence has been moved per se, or patio has been extended into an encroaching, then now it's going to be, it should be amended so that the title is current and accurate, and it would be a negotiable with the buyer. Is that correct?
I'm not quite sure if that's correct because your sentences were not complete in regard to these issues. So I'm going to give you the credit and say that was an outstanding answer, but I want to go further in answering it, okay? So look at paragraph, let's see here. Let's see, the standard printed exceptions. So where are the exceptions listed here? Dun, 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 dun. Oh, you know what? They're not going to be listed here. They're going to be in the actual title policy that's issued. So here we go. 6A8. When a title policy is issued, it typically does not cover these issues. Look at these issues it lists right there. Discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in area, boundary lines, encroachments, protrusions, or overlapping improvements. What they're saying is title company is going to defend the owner's right of ownership, right? The new buyer's right of ownership, unless it has to do with one of these issues. If it's a protrusion, if it's an overlapping improvement, my neighbor put his shed over the boundary line, That's an overlapping improvement. Title company says we're out. We're not going to get involved in those situations. However, for a mere 15% premium to our standard title policy rate, we will cover some of these issues. In fact, we'll cover all of them, except what?
Minerals.
Nope. What does it say? Read it right there, right there. Nope. Shortages in area. Look at paragraph 2. Will be amended for this additional premium price to read shortages in area. 99% of agents misunderstand that. They think if we pay for the additional title policy, we get the premium coverage, that it's going to cover shortages in area. Is that what that says? Just the opposite. It says we'll cover all these other issues, protrusions, overlapping improvements, et cetera, but the exception, the exclusion for shortages in area is going to remain. We're not going to defend that under any circumstances, even if you pay us an extra 15%. Shortages in area is never covered by a title policy. That's the message that you need to understand and convey to buyers and sellers. When would this ever come up? Let's say that the MLS listing took, which it pulls automatically, the size of the lot, and let's say it's 45,000 square feet, and it pulled that information directly from the appraisal district. Appraisal district says the lot size is 45,000 square feet. After purchase, the buyer has an official survey measurement done, and it comes back at 44,500 square feet. Who is going to make the buyer whole on that 500 square feet that they paid for but didn't get? Not the title policy, not the title company. They're out of that. They got no part in it. If the buyer wants to sue the seller, go for it. But the title company is not going to be involved. That's a shortages in area discrepancy, not covered.
So what you're saying for that particular choice, so you're saying that it will be amended to say that there is a shortage in area, but they're not going to.
No. It's not a.
It says will be amended to.
That's right. What is it amending? The list of exceptions from coverage. And it's going to delete all the other exceptions except shortages in area. Meaning, we're going to cover any defense that we need of your right of ownership unless it's related to shortages in area. That exception shall remain. Exception from coverage. They're not saying it's short. They're not saying it's long. They're not saying it's correct. They're simply saying we don't care because we're not involved. That's what it says. Okay?
So it doesn't have to do with the missing.
Go sue the seller. Go see a lawyer. Get some legal advice. That's really beyond. That's not our job. To answer that question, our job is to explain what the contract language means to our client. If we pay for this extended coverage, it's going to cover all these other exceptions unless or except for shortages in area. That will never be covered. Yes.
So when you get the survey, you should check it against what, make sure your buyer understands this is what the survey says.
Yes. That's what the survey shows, but guess what? The buyer may want to get another survey after closing. I guarantee you it's going to be a little different. That's why shortages in area is never covered. Every measurement will always be different. It's not an exact science. Even with GPS and lasers and all that, when you're talking about 45,000 square feet or even 15,000 square feet, it's going to be off by 2 or 3 square feet. You know, at a minimum, it's going to be different. That is not a cause of action that the title company is going to defend. Okay? So yeah, okay, that's the good question. Should we advise our buyers to request the premium coverage? You get 100 title company reps up here, you know what they're going to say every time? Absolutely. Only 15% more, right? On a $2,000 policy, that's an extra $300. That's chicken feed. Wow, that's a Starbucks coffee every other week for a year. Does your buyer need it? So first of all, we really shouldn't advise them on that. We should simply explain what it means. And we can speak from experience. And my experience says, in a typical subdivision lot, the boundaries are well defined. They've often been there for many, many years. This property's already had 6 owners. There's never been a dispute. You can look at the fence lines. There's nobody shed on your property. It's your call on whether you think the additional expense is worth it. But I can tell you, in my experience on a subdivision lot, I have never, ever seen a client have a dispute over any of these issues. Okay, now you might be the first, so I'm not saying you shouldn't buy the coverage. We don't want to give that advice. We can just share from our experience. Now, if we're talking about an odd-shaped property, we're talking about a farm and ranch acreage property where there could be significant issues involved with protrusions and overlapping improvements. You got to move a half a mile of fence. That could be a significant issue. In those cases, I would say, yeah, maybe likely, because the survey lines are not lot, block, quarter acre lots lined up like little soldiers. Does that make sense? I see a hand. Yes, sir.
Even they said from the area, at the end it says more or less. So always say 800 feet.
Oh, you're talking about in the MLS listings? Yeah, they say that because no measurement is exact. And not just on the land, we're talking about the house. You could have the builder quote the square footage, the appraisal district quote the square footage, an actual appraiser measurement quote the square footage. I guarantee you they're all different. So that's why it's more or less. Buyer must verify. This is a good faith number, and this is the source. This is where we got it, but we can't guarantee it. It's the same exact situation because it will never, 2 measurements will never be the same. Okay? All right. Let's keep rocking and rolling a little bit here. We're halfway through the class and we're barely started on these documents. We may need a 6-hour class for this, okay? So, I'm on page 3. I'm just looking for, I'm not going to read every paragraph to you. I'm scrolling through to see what I think is most important. And we'll talk about that. But if one of these issues jumps out of importance to you, let me know. By the way, I would encourage you, you'll typically receive a copy of the title policy once it's issued prior to closing. Read 1 or 2 of those things. And there's a lot of boilerplate, but there's also some interesting things, particularly in paragraph C where they start mentioning the exceptions and things like that. And you'll understand what this contract means a little bit better if you just read through 1 or 2 of those title policies. Let's look at, let's see, this is page 3, paragraph E2, membership in a property owners association. So this is, remember, this is the buyer agent submitting the contract. And the buyer's agent says this property is or is not in a mandatory property owners association. You're typically taking that information from the seller because the seller may have provided a what? An HOA addendum, right? Or you may have personal familiarity with the property and you know it's in an HOA. So you indicate whether it is or isn't. Seller notifies buyer under the Texas Property Code that as a purchaser of property in a residential community identified in paragraph 2A to which the property is located, here's the disclosure, you are obligated to be a member of the POA. Restrictive covenants governing the use and occupancy of the property and all dedicatory instruments governing the establishment, maintenance, or operations of this residential community have been or will be recorded in the real property records of the county to which the property is located. Copies of the restrictive covenants and dedicatory instruments, it tells you how to find them. Okay, go down to the bottom of that section in bold. If buyer is concerned about these matters, about the HOA and its restrictions, and can I park my trailer on the front yard? Can I raise goats in the backyard? I'm concerned about this property owners association. That's what this says. If buyer is concerned about these matters, The TREC promulgated addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in a POA should be used. What is shocking about that statement? We use it as just as a standard, but who do we typically say is to prepare and provide this addendum? The seller, through the listing agent. It's part of our listing documents, right? We're getting the seller's disclosure, the HOA addendum, the MUD notice, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. I think that's best practice. I think that's smart. But I just also think it's interesting that the offer contract says it's the buyer who should use that form if they're concerned about these matters. Isn't that interesting? High level stuff. By the way, is that true of the MUD notice too? Absolutely, emphatically no. The MUD notice is a seller notice, and if the seller does not provide that notice at or prior to execution of the contract, the buyer gets an automatic get out of jail free card all the way to closing. That means they can cancel that contract anytime and get their earnest money back just for saying they want it. So it's completely different than the HOA. Yes.
So with the MUD notice, a lot of times in order to get your CDA, you need to have a MUD notice public. So, you know, I need a lot of documents to get your certain agreement. So how, if they haven't sent it yet.
So Kevin is saying, but we can't even get our CDA approved without the MUD notice. The MUD notice is eventually going to be provided, okay? That's not the point. The point is the timing on delivery of the MUD notice. Quite often the listing agent's like, yeah, we'll get to that. You know, we rushed to get it on market. I haven't had time. I'll get you that seller's disclosure. I'll get you the MUD notice. Give me a couple days. If that contract has been signed, that listing agent has done a grave disservice to their sellers, because it doesn't matter if the listing agent sends it over 2 days after they're under contract. Doesn't matter if it's any moment in time after the buyer and seller execute that agreement, the buyer still has the right of cancellation all the way to closing.
You can ask for it, and it's still in your client's favor
if it's after. If I'm the buyer's agent and the listing agent has not provided a MUD notice, I'm keeping my mouth zipped shut until after we're under contract. And then I'm gonna say, hey, we didn't see a MUD notice in your disclosures. Would you mind sending one of those over? I'm also not gonna say a word to my buyer about it. I'm gonna keep that information in my back pocket just in case I need it. Okay, it's gonna be my little secret. But if I get in a situation where my buyer needs out of that contract and they don't have any other means of cancellation, I've got it ready to play. I've got the card. I got the ace in the hole, okay? Oh, by the way, somebody mentioned this to me the other day, and I thought it was brilliant. All of you who signed on online, you're not getting 3 hours of CE credit for this, but this is gonna make it worth it, okay? And if it was one of you who brought this to my attention, raise your hand and take credit. But what the person said to me was, I'm in a competitive offer situation, multiple offers. I'm representing the buyer. I know it's in a MUD. No MUD notice has been provided. What I'm going to do is put no option period in my offer. No option period. It's going to make the offer extremely attractive to the seller. We'll still have inspections. If the seller digs in their heels and isn't reasonable, then I'll pull the card. It's just as effective as the option period, but it goes all the way to closing. That's pretty cool, isn't it? That's that's high level. When I heard that, I'm like, that's brilliant. Actually, I know it was Kevin Miney and Ryan Barker. One of them, I forget which. They're the same entity in my mind. They called me and said, it was Ryan. He said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. Am I missing something? Is there a hole in this? And I said, no, it's brilliant. And there's no hole in it. As long as you're quite certain that it's in a mud and no mud notice was provided, then you're golden. And so, well, then it's irrelevant. NA. Yeah. Now, here's the deal. This is where, and this was the situation Ryan was in. In the city of Houston, they're in a mud that nobody knows about. And properties in Houston, I forget the name of it, reach out to Michael Hughes, he'll tell you exactly. They, in this one situation Ryan was in, the listing agent had provided a mud notice for the local neighborhood mud, but had not provided a mud notice for this statutory taxing district that covers the entire city of Houston. The other one, and nobody knows about the other one. And so he was able, on the basis of not presenting that, to present this offer without an option period. Okay?
Do you know if they were accepted?
I don't know. I didn't get any follow-up. He was structuring his offer. He just wanted a final green light before he sent it in that way.
Like if there's multiple months, they got that vote.
Yes.
If they miss one, then you miss.
Yeah, that's right. Bob says if there are multiple muds, you need multiple forms. That's true. You need a disclosure for every mud because each one is specific to the mud on the tax rate, the indebtedness and all that. It's possible there could be 3 or 4 muds because there are different statutory taxing districts that could be applicable to it. A flood district, you know, a sewer district. It could be any number of things. Okay. So Bob's saying, what about the PIDs, the public improvement districts? I don't think they're subject to the MUD requirement. You still have to disclose it, but I don't think it's the get out of jail free card that the MUD is. Okay, I don't think so, but that would be a great question for Michael Hughes. He is the expert on MUDs. He probably knows more about MUDs than anybody in the state of Texas. He is really, really brilliant on that subject.
At one point you showed us kind of where to find that, but I don't know where to do it.
Go into Workplace and ask him, and that way he'll post it where we can all see it. All right, Tidewaters, annexation, utility service provider. There's your PID. If property is a public improvement district, seller must give buyer written notice as required, property code. An addendum containing the required notice shall be attached to this contract. So it may in fact be included as one of those required notices. Bob, that would be a great question to ask Michael in work. Is it workplace or workspace? Workplace. All right. Property condition. And this is interesting. Let's look at this 7A. Access, inspections, and utilities. Seller shall permit buyer and buyer's agents access to the property at reasonable times. Reasonable times, reasonable notice. Buyer may have the property inspected by inspectors selected by buyer and licensed by TREC or otherwise permitted by law to make inspections. Let's pause right there. These are some actual questions I've gotten. They had their inspection. The buyers had their inspection, and now they want to come back and do another inspection. Does the seller have the right to say no? What do you think? It doesn't matter. This paragraph doesn't reference the option period. What does it say? Seller shall permit buyer and buyer's agents access to the property at reasonable times. It's part of their due diligence, and it can be done during the option period or any time prior to closing. The answer is the seller has no right to say no. Doggone it, they're buying this property. If they want to send in a house inspector, an HVAC inspector, a roofing inspector, they have every right to do it. Now, they can't just show up on the front door unannounced. They can't come at 10 o'clock at night. It has to be reasonable times, reasonable notice, but there's no limitation on this. So sellers need to understand that. Any hydrostatic testing must be separately authorized by seller in writing. Seller at seller's expense shall immediately cause existing, oh, this is a separate sentence. Very important. Seller at seller's expense shall immediately cause existing utilities to be turned on and shall keep utilities on during the time the contract is in effect. Wow. A lot of people don't know that's in the contract, do they? I had this come up a week ago, 1 week ago, not with my person, but one of our agents, trying to do an inspection, trying to do the final walkthrough, and you can't do either one because the utilities are turned off. There's only one situation where they really don't have to do that, and that's when they're not using this form. When it's typically like an REO property, if you've ever come across this, it's a bank-owned property. They took it back in foreclosure. Now they've put it on the market. They're not using this contract. The bank is using their own contract, and you know what it says? We're not turning the utilities on, right? Or we'll turn it on for 1 day at your expense. But they typically have all the utilities turned off. But again, they're the principal. They're the seller, and they're using their own contract, which is their right.
So are you saying because we put in a contract on a property that was bank owned and they said on there, I mean, we used this document, but then they said that they weren't going to turn on the utilities, they had to pay to have the thing turned on.
Where did they say that? This is the controlling document unless this document is amended. The listing is not part of the contract.
So what they said is that we were going to have to do it, and they did, that make my client. So
Well, they didn't make your client voluntarily agreed to do it because they were under no obligation. In fact, it was just the opposite. The seller is the one who was bound to turn on those utilities at their expense and leave them on until closing.
well, when they turned on, I guess maybe this is the reason, when they couldn't get the gas turned on until they had the plumbing inspection.
Yeah.
When they did a plumbing inspection, water went everywhere when they turned on the water, so they had to shut off.
That's why REOs don't want the utilities on. They're concerned about that kind of stuff. But unless they have amended this contract and all parties have agreed to it, or they're using their own contract under different terms, this is binding.
They should have had to pay for it.
Yes. And this is why you're in this class today. This, and I mean that sincerely. This is the kind of information that every agent needs to know so that when you're in a situation and the seller's saying, we're not turning on the utilities, the buyer can do that if they want to. Well, I'm so sorry, but the way I read the contract that you signed, it says that it's your responsibility.
Even if you write a contract based on what they say in the list, they can reject the contract if you go in and say.
Okay, listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying. This verbiage controls unless this contract is amended. So if you take language that's in the listing and you put it into an amendment and you make that amendment part of the contract, then that language will control. But just because people say stuff, right, it means nothing unless it's in the contract, okay? Contracts control, okay? All right, let's keep rocking and rolling here. That's property condition. Seller's disclosure notice, buyer has received, buyer hasn't received, buyer's not required to furnish the notice. By the way, take our Legal Update 1 class, and you'll see there's a very nice list in there of the 11 scenarios in which a seller's disclosure is not required. And there are some. They typically deal with death and divorce. But where this typically comes up, or I've confronted this multiple times, is when the seller has refused to provide a seller's disclosure, and it's an investor, and what they say is, we've never lived in the house. We just bought it last week. We know nothing about the condition of the property, so we're not going to fill out a disclosure. Is that a legal posture that's defensible according to the contract? No. There is no carve out for the fact that you're an investor. Now, what if it's true that you bought the property sight unseen? You've never been to the property, you didn't have an inspection, and you know nothing about it. Okay, you guys are exactly right. That's what you put in the seller's disclosure. I don't know. But you still have to provide a disclosure. Okay, and you have to tell what you know. You have to tell the truth about what you know. Okay, all right. E, lender required repairs and treatments. And if you don't know what that means, that's a situation where typically an FHA or a VA loan, because in a conventional, they're not even going to really know the condition of the home. But let's say it's a VA deal, they send out an inspector and they note that the roof is 25 years old, on 20-year shingles. They're not going to loan money on that. They're going to require that a repair be made, a roof replaced prior to issuing the loan. So here we go. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, neither party is obligated to pay for lender required repairs, which includes treatment for wood destroying insects. If the parties do not agree to pay for the lender required repairs or treatments, this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. If the cost of lender required repairs and treatments exceeds 5% of the sale price, buyer may terminate this contract and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. Okay, so just because the lender says there's a problem, that doesn't obligate the buyer or the seller to start spending a lot of money. Okay, they can cancel the contract and walk away. That's what that says. Okay, completions of repairs and treatments. I do want to read this because this shows up all the times. Agents violate the law because they don't understand this paragraph. Let's read it. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller will complete all agreed repairs and treatments prior to the closing date, and all required permits must be obtained, and, listen carefully, repairs and treatments must be performed by persons who are licensed to provide such repairs or treatments, or if no license is required by law, are commercially engaged in the trade of providing such repairs or treatments. So tell me, is it appropriate to write in special provisions or in an amendment, in a repair amendment, all repairs to be completed by licensed professionals? Not only is there no need, because the language is already in the contract, you have violated the law by writing into the contract language that is already there. You addressed an issue that has already been addressed, but this contract was written by attorneys, and I don't see any attorneys in this room. We are not allowed to write contract language. So it is, the TREC specifically prohibits real estate agents from addressing issues that are already addressed in the contract, unless we're amending the contract to do something different. But to say what the contract already says as if we can improve on its language, that's against the law, okay? So never write that. Never, ever, ever write that. And in an amendment, you don't need to write it because it's amending this contract. So it's part of this contract. So it's presumed that this language is still applicable, okay? So you never need to put that in. Residential service contract, broker sales agent. Yes.
So you got this seller, he gets this list of repairs, he gets his screwdriver and his drill out. And he keeps his Home Depot receipts.
Right. So that's a violation of the contract. Now, some of these things, they may be very simple. It may be replacing a light fixture, and this guy's 70 years old. He's replaced 1,000 of them in his time. He's kind of handy with his hands. This is a no-brainer. If that's the case, in the repair amendment, this language needs to be amended. Seller permitted to perform these repairs himself as long as he provides receipts prior to closing for the materials. Otherwise, other repairs are subject to the terms of the contract. Okay? Make sense? Spell it out. All right. Yes.
I make sure they understand that from day one.
Okay.
Do all these things before we get on the contract.
Yeah. Well, that's smart. Texas law requires a real estate broker or sales agent who's a party to a transaction or acting on behalf of a spouse, parent, child, business entity in which the broker or sales agent owns more than 10%, or a trust in which the broker or sales agent acts as a trustee, blah, blah, blah. Disclose it to the other party in writing. So if you own any piece of this more than 10%, or you're representing a close family member, you have to disclose that. And if you're representing, if you're the buyer's agent and it's your relationship, you can disclose it right here. If it's the listing broker, they're going to disclose that where? In the listing agreement, but how am I going to know it is the buyer's agent? Well, what if it's their brother?
Well, seller is related.
Where do you put, how do I know that? You put it in private agent remarks in the MLS or in your separate document, offer assistance instructions. Somehow you have to clue the buyer's agent in advance of writing the offer because it needs to be in the offer. Okay. All right. Closing. The closing of the sale will be on or before certain date. Notice it doesn't say what. Time is of the essence. It is not in this paragraph. Or within 7 days after objections made under paragraph 6D have been cured or waived, whichever date is later. If either party fails to close the sale by the closing date, the non-defaulting party may exercise the remedies contained in paragraph 15. Remember I said, if the buyer or seller fail to meet the closing date, they are in default. That's what this says. They are in default. But the courts have consistently ruled that because it's not time is of the essence, we all need to be adults about this. We need to be reasonable about this. But by the way, it references paragraph 15. What are the remedies of a non-defaulting party? Anybody know offhand? This is something you should just be able to reel off like the 10 Commandments. We all know the 10 Commandments. Okay, never mind. The remedies of the non-defaulting party. 1, claim the earnest money, right? They defaulted, not us. What's the second remedy? Sue. We're going to sue you for what? Specific performance. You said you were going to sell us this house, doggone it, you're going to sell us this house. And if you're not going to do it willingly, we're going to get a judge to order you to do it. Okay? Those are the remedies in paragraph 15. We can claim the earnest money or we can sue you. Make you do what the contract says. David, was that your hand? Ask. Oh, okay. I was too quick. All right. All right. I'll get you next time. We'll scroll down to 15 real quick here. 15, default. If the buyer fails to comply with this contract, buyer will be in default and seller may enforce specific performance or anything else allowed by law, or B, terminate the contract and receive the earnest money as liquidated damages, thereby releasing both parties from the contract. Now, we all knew that, right? Everybody knew that. Those are the 2 remedies. But wait for it. This is beautiful. Let's keep going here. If seller fails to comply, oh, it's the same language there. Go down now to 18, paragraph 18. Let's say that the non-defaulting party wants to get the earnest money back. That's what they're going to do. I'm not going to sue you, but doggone it, I'm keeping the $5 grand. Can the other party refuse to sign the earnest money release and say, well, we'll just let the title company sit on the money? Is that a legal option? Is that a real life option that people try to exercise? Okay, let's go down here. Look at paragraph C, 18C. Upon termination of this contract, either party or the escrow agent may send a release of earnest money to each party, and the party shall execute counterparts of the release and deliver same to the escrow agent. If either party, this is the important part, fails to execute the release Either party may make a written demand to the escrow agent for the earnest money. Okay, so they'll say the seller's the non-defaulting party. They want to claim the earnest money. The buyer says, I ain't signing it. Okay. Does the seller have any options? Yes, they can send a written demand to the title company and say, I'm the non-defaulting party. I have a right to this money. Release it to me. That's a demand. Okay, well, let's see what happens here. Escrow agent shall promptly provide a copy of the demand to the other party. If escrow agent does not receive written objection to the demand from the other party within 15 days, escrow agent may disperse the earnest money to the party making the demand, reduced by the amount of any unpaid expenses incurred, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now hold on. What if the other party does object? What if the buyer who is in default sends a letter to the title company and says, well, I know the seller made a demand, I'm making my own demand. But the buyer is in default. Okay, keep that in mind. Go to paragraph D. Any party who wrongfully fails or refuses to sign a release acceptable to the escrow agent within 7 days of receipt of the request will be liable to the other party for, and you should highlight this, damages, the earnest money, reasonable attorney's fees, and all costs of suit. If real estate agents were aware of this paragraph, we would resolve so many disputes so much quicker. If you're representing a buyer or a seller and they are in default and they're refusing to sign the earnest money release, you need to tell them that's your choice. But as your professional representative, it's my obligation to call your attention to the contract you signed, which says that if you refuse to sign this earnest money release, the other party can sue you. They're going to get not only the earnest money, not only all their legal expenses, they can get damages as well. And what does that mean? It could be treble. It could be anything the judge decides. So if you will just highlight this paragraph and when needed, bring it to the attention of, or in some cases, you need to bring it to the attention of the cooperating agent. When their party's digging their heels in and their agent's not doing their part to get them to the table, you know, say, hey, you know, it's my professional responsibility to remind you of the provisions of paragraph 18D. And if your client doesn't sign this release, I'm going to encourage my client to seek legal counsel and to exercise all their rights under the contract. And this is going to turn from a $5,000 dispute into a $50,000 dispute or more. Is that what you want for your client? Okay, that's our job. Solve these problems, advocate for our client, get these situations resolved as quickly as possible. And that paragraph will be immensely helpful in doing that. Okay, anybody learn something there? It's worth the price of admission, wasn't it?
But Frank, if that comes up, is it okay to negotiate with them, or should you just hang on to the damages that are modeled here?
Well, negotiation is always appropriate. I mean, if one party can make a demand and the other party can say, yeah, I know it's $5,000 and I'm in default, but there were some extenuating circumstances. Why don't we just split the difference at 25? That's always appropriate. But in the end, the defaulting party is required to sign that release. Okay, so if the other party's not going to negotiate, they don't have to. All right. Paragraph 20 deals with federal tax requirements for foreign persons. There's really only one thing I want you to understand, and this is full of shock and awe when agents understand it for the first time. If a buyer purchases a home from a foreign person, someone who's not a citizen of the United States, and that foreign person has a tax liability to the IRS as a result of the sale of that home, guess who's going to be held liable for that tax liability? The buyer. The buyer. Think about that. It was the seller's tax liability, and the IRS is going to come after the buyer. yes, you should be like, what in the world? Is this America or what? But here's the IRS's position. The seller's in Kazakhstan. How are we going to collect our taxes from them in Kazakhstan? Where are we going to get them? 123 Elm Street. Who's living there now? Right? That's in our jurisdiction. We're going to go get it from them. So what this paragraph says is if you're involved in a transaction and the seller is a foreign person, you need to get some counsel. Typically the title company will provide it, but it is not their responsibility. But you need to get affidavits, and this is routine, where the seller will sign an affidavit affirming that they're not a foreign person. If they are a foreign person, then there needs to be, and the title company will do this, they will escrow funds from the transaction to cover any potential future tax liability. If you're a buyer or you're a buyer's agent, you need to make sure that that's addressed and that is done, or your buyer could get a very nasty surprise. Okay, yes?
So what tax are they talking about?
So it would be a gain on the sale of real property. It would be the same thing, the same tax that we're subject to as citizens, but the law allows us to defer that gain into our next purchase, defer, and at the end of our lives, they give us like a $250,000 waiver on our lifetime gains, but that's not applicable to somebody who's not a citizen of this country and they're out of the country. Okay? All right. Notices, paragraph 21. If there are legal notices, this is where they're to be delivered. Many agents leave this paragraph blank. Please don't do that. This transaction could in fact result in litigation. Some agents fill it in and they put their own address or their brokerage address. Do you really want legal notices being delivered to you or to your office? And most of them have a demand deadline. You don't want to be responsible for that. So go ahead and fill it out with the information of your client. And this is why I said in the offer assistance document on the listing side, I think it's very appropriate to put the contact information for the seller there. At least the address, the email, the phone number where they can receive legal notices. Many agents are afraid of doing that because of what? The other party's going to steal their client, okay?
They were just talking about that on Facebook in the
Yes.
group yesterday.
Yeah. So by the way, it is a violation of our code of ethics for us to contact or attempt to solicit a party who's in a relationship with another agent. So I think the risk of that is very minimal. And if it happens, we have enforcement mechanisms. I think we need to follow the contract and put the information in there. That's my opinion.
The girl yesterday, I'm just interested in this because the lady yesterday in that platinum group said, but once a contract has been executed and it's all done,
Yes.
and we've closed, then that is no longer, there's no longer a client relationship.
Yeah, so Jeanette is saying
And
that
it's free game.
they're right. It's game on after closing because the representation has ended. Absolutely. But by then, hopefully you've demonstrated your value. And if it's the buyer, well, that information is known. Their name is going to be in the contracts. And we know where they live, so a lot of that's going to be publicly available anyway. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Okay. Agreement of the parties. This is where you just indicate all the other documents that are part of this contract. And this is what links them. This is what ties an addendum to this actual contract. Is in the contract itself, you say there's an addendum that's part of this. So you absolutely must check these boxes if there is an addendum to link it. And if there's some oddball thing or some personally drafted agreement, then you can check other and write that in there. Consult an attorney before signing. If they have attorneys, they can be listed there. I've never had that situation. Then the execution date. Who typically fills in the execution date of the contract? The listing agent. And here's why, right? The buyer signs the contract, sends it, the buyer's agent sends it to the listing agent. Who signs it now? The sellers. So it's in the listing, the seller's not the last person, the listing agent's not the last person to sign. They don't sign it at all. But they fill in the execution date. What triggers the effective date for this contract?
When it's transmitted to the buyer.
It's those two together. Listen carefully. The contract is effective when all parties have signed and all parties have been notified that all parties have signed. So if the buyer signs, sent it over, the seller signs, but the listing agent hasn't informed the buyer's agent that the sellers have signed, do we have an effective contract? We do not. And let me tell you where this comes in. What if the sellers sign and before the listing agent notifies the buyer's agent, they get a better offer? Can they take it? Absolutely. There's no effective contract, but everybody signed it. Doesn't matter. It takes both pieces. All parties signed, all parties notified. Okay? So what if they sign, the listing agent tells the buyer's agent, hey, seller signed, and then the sellers get a better offer? Can they take it? Only as a backup. Only as a backup offer. Okay? So let's say that this,
You don't have to have the notification in writing?
it could be just notification. It could be by telephone, text, smoke signal. It doesn't matter. Now, obviously, it's better in writing because then you have proof of it. But all the law says is notification has taken place. Yes, David? So you said you're working with a buyer and they're not represented? So you're the listing agent. So you're an open house hosting agent and a represented buyer walks in. So what's your question?
How do you take that role as therapist rather than give them information that they will take back to therapy?
So you are not the buyer's agent. If they're represented by an agent, you are hosting that open house and merely providing information to them. You make no pretense of being their agent or their representative.
So if there was some work with you, then you are okay with the contract.
They cannot work with you as their representative if they're already represented.
Well, maybe I'm saying, you just said they have it, so I'm not even sure.
If they have an agent, that language typically means they're in a representation agreement, okay? So now this is not illegal. I'm not going to respond to this legally. I'm going to respond from a business perspective. I think it's unwise to ask somebody who walked into an open house if they're currently working with another agent, because they are always 1,000% of the time going to say yes. And 999% of the time they're lying. But because you asked the question and they said yes, now you better back off. So I never ask the question. I act as if everybody who walks into an open house is unrepresented, and I begin serving them as if I am their realtor, because I know that if they truly have an agent and they're truly represented, what are they going to do? They're going to tell me. But I don't want to give them an opportunity to lie to me. I want to give them an opportunity to tell the truth to me. So I begin serving them until they throw up the red flag and say, oh, wait a minute, I have an agent. Yes.
You don't even have to say it. If they are working with an agent, they'll put the agent's name, phone number.
Yes.
And you know it's good.
Yeah.
I don't use that.
Yeah. Well, and it may be editable so that you can remove that question. I don't know. David, would you do me one favor? Would you go check with Robin? Ask her if the pizza is here, and if not, when is it expected? Okay? Tell her there's a room full of people who want to know the information to that question. Here she is.
It's not here, we got another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, very good. Y'all got to put up with me a little longer. If by the way, we've been at this an hour. If you need a restroom break, go for it. But I'm gonna keep talking, okay? Because we're nearing the end here. Yes, Jorge? Yes.
The person that is starting to work with, according to he was representing, but he just about the properties. And he wants
I bought this book, right?
Yes.
It actually has the information that you can put down.
Yes.
So the agent that they put on here, I could actually search up the person I know.
Yeah.
There's no phone number.
Yeah.
I mean, they just take it all.
So when I see anomalies like that, I go into curiosity mode. And I would say to them, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you indicated in your registration form that you're represented by Susie Q Realtor. I tried to find her information in our Realtor database and I could not find her. Do you know if she's still actively licensed and practicing real estate? And then the truth will probably come out. Well, I don't know. We haven't seen her in 4 years since she last helped us purchase our home. So just be curious and you may get to the bottom of it. Okay? Okay, so my question earlier was who fills in the effective date? And your answer correctly was typically the listing agent. Now, if you are the buyer's agent, the listing agent tells you, hallelujah, the sellers have signed, we're under contract, so excited to be working with you on this deal, sends you back the contracts, and the effective date has not been filled in. What should you do as the buyer's agent? What? Say it loud. Fill it in. That's it. There's no law about who has to fill it in. So if you get it back and it's blank, fill it in. Now let's say that everybody signed at 10 p.m. on Tuesday night and you were notified at 10:15, everybody signed. You get the contract delivered to you on Wednesday and you see there's no effective date. What do you fill in, Tuesday or Wednesday? Remember, what is the criteria? All parties have signed. All parties have been notified that all parties have signed. When did that occur? Tuesday. So even though it's Wednesday, when you get the written documents, you put Tuesday in there. It's critically important that you get that right because so many deadlines trigger off the effective date. And the counting begins when, Nancy? Help her out? The next day. The next day. Okay, very good. Broker information, that's it. Oh, by the way, why is the right-hand column longer than the left-hand column? That's right. Column on the right is for intermediary, where both involved agents are with the same brokerage. Well done. If it's a typical co-op with two different brokerages, you'll just fill out the top half of the right column and then the left column. Okay, very good. And again, it's the buyer's agent filling this out. So the listing agent should help out the buyer's agent by providing all this information in the offer assistance guidelines. Here's my license number. Here's my broker's name. Here's my broker's license number. Here's our office address. They should provide all that. Make it easy for the buyer's agent. Don't make them do all the research, or worse, send back a contract with a bunch of blanks in it. Okay, make it easy. Now look at the bottom, oft overlooked paragraph. Disclosure. Pursuant to a previous separate agreement, such as an MLS offer of compensation or other agreement between brokers, listing broker has agreed to pay other broker a fee. And that typically says what? 3%, okay? This disclosure is for informational purposes and does not change the previous agreement between parties to pay or share a commission. In other words, this is not binding. Why is this not binding? Because the brokers are not parties to this transaction. Who are the parties? The buyer and seller. We don't even sign this thing. So this disclosure at the bottom of the page is for informational purposes only. And what if you, by default, your buyer's agent, you put in there 3%, blah, 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 blah. 3 days later, you're under contract. Listing broker calls you and says, hey, you put 3% in the bottom of page 10. Why'd you do that? You said, because I get 3%. That's what I do. And the listing broker says, you didn't read the MLS agreement offer of compensation, did you? We're offering $1. What controls the MLS offer of compensation? This is not binding. Has that ever happened in real life? That was me. That was me. When I said I should have sued my client, that's what happened. Yes, I love you guys so much. I sacrifice, go through these terrible situations. I had a buyer's rep agreement that promised me 3% from the buyers if the seller didn't compensate me at that level. And I discovered after making the offer, and we're under contract, that the offer of compensation to the buyer's broker was $1. My commission would have been just over $10,000. So I say to my buyers, I'm so sorry. The listing broker is not compensating according to our agreement. You are responsible for my commission. You know what they said to me? If we have to come up with an additional $10,000 to pay you, we're not going to be able to complete the purchase. And then we're going to be in default. And then it's really going to get ugly. Do you really want to do that to us? And like a fool, I said, oh no. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take care of you. And I did, and I finished the contract, and I didn't even get the dollar. They didn't even pay me the dollar, okay? But I look back on that, and I think, what a fool I was. I earned that commission. I had a contractual right to that commission, and doggone it, if somebody can pay $335,000 for a house, they can find 10 grand to pay my commission.
So you're saying you should have sued the buyer because?
Absolutely. That's the only person I could have sued.
Because that contract is binding, right? That buyer's agreement, it is.
It is.
Was one correct, or would they, you think they would have backed out of the contract?
It doesn't matter if they backed out of the contract or not. I fulfilled my duty by finding them home and putting it under contract. Even if they backed out, they still would have owed me the commission. And yes, I would have won it. I would have taken them to probably justice court, which has a $10,000 limit, sued them for $10,000. I would have won the judgment. Now, would they have paid me or not? I don't know. I might have had to sue them again, you know, to get payment, but I would have won the judgment. The contract is black and white.
How early with this in your career?
You know, it was early. It was probably a year or two in. And I've looked back at that so many times, and I'm like, well, doggone it. You know, that was money that I took out of my family's pockets, out of my retirement, out of our vacation fund, whatever it is. You know, I was entitled to that money, and I should not have walked away from it. So I would encourage you.
I was going to finish the story by saying you got 5 referrals from that family.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, it kind of soured the whole atmosphere. When yeah, that's right. Never again. Yes. So sometimes you get paid, sometimes you get a lesson, and that was a lesson. Okay, the last page in the 1 to 4 is the receipts page. This is typically going to be completed by whom? By the title company. That's correct. They have a copy of the contract. As the option fee is paid, earnest money is paid, they'll receipt it. When they receive the contract, they'll receipt the contract. If there's an additional earnest money deposit, they'll receipt that and keep all that on record. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, that is the 1 to 4. Any questions about that? That's the main document in your representation of a buyer.
There was a couple that you skipped.
There was. Yep. Couldn't do it all. Was there one that was of interest to you? Well, I mostly skipped between 13 and 18. Okay. Well, no, because I went down to 15. Remember, I was trying to get to the remedies.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Property condition, Brokers and sales agents, closing. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, if you hang around till 1, we'll be done, but I understand if you got something to do, but thank you for the nice feedback. We are going to go, we got more to cover. Possession, special provisions. Okay, possession upon funding, or if it's going to be, you know, by separate lease, if the buyer's going to move in earlier, the seller's going to stay after closing.
Okay.
Yep.
About special provision.
Okay.
Can you give an example of something that you would?
Yes.
put in provision?
I can only think, I'm sure there are some other legits. I can only think of one thing that legitimately would go into special provisions. And that is if it's a cash offer and the buyer is going to have an appraisal and they want the right to cancel the contract if the appraisal comes in less than the contract sale price. So if it's a financed offer, where is that dealt with, that situation? In the third-party financing addendum. Yeah, and if they want to do something a little more creative than the third party, what else? The appraisal addendum. Right, those are 2 documents, but both of those deal with financed offers. So in a cash offer, typically the buyer's not going to have an appraisal, but every once in a while they will. And they will want the right of cancellation or renegotiation if it comes in low. Now, here's an important point, and this is the most important thing about special provisions. You should never write anything that goes in there because you're not an attorney. That doesn't mean that you can't use the paragraph, but the language should not be yours. Who can write language that would appropriately go in special provisions? Attorneys, and who else? The buyer or the seller, right? The principals to a transaction can write anything they want. They can write a contract on a napkin, doesn't matter. So when a buyer or a seller wants to do something that you think appropriately would go in special provisions, ask them to send you the language in writing, in an email, for example, or have them contact their attorney and have the attorney send you the language. And sometimes you might need to coach them. You might need to have, I wouldn't put this in writing, but I would have a phone conversation. Say, hey, why don't you just send me an email asking me to add this language to the contract? Well, what language? Well, say something like this. If the appraisal comes in less than contract price, seller reserves the right to cancel the contract and get the earnest money back. Write something like that, okay? But let it come to them, from them to you in writing as a request to put that language in the contract, and then it's all legal, okay?
You know, the only thing I've ever seen written in there is that you must, the seller agrees to leave it clean.
Oh, thank you, Jeanette. So Jeanette says the only language she's ever seen is the seller agrees to leave the home clean, or in many cases, the seller agrees to have a professional cleaning prior to closing. We talked about this the other day in our team, and that actually is inappropriate because there is a place for that in the contract, and it's on property condition. There it is, paragraph 7. So check this out. Paragraph 7D, acceptance of property condition. 2 options. 1, buyer accepts the property as is. That's typically what will be checked. But look at number 2. Buyer accepts the property as is, provided seller at seller's expense shall complete the following specific repairs and treatments. Professional cleaning prior to closing. How about that? You put it right, it's already got a space in the contract for it, so you don't put it in special provisions. You can. Yes. Yeah, you can. Because the principal is allowed to write language for the contract. It's their contract.
6C.
Go over 6C. I hope that's not a hard one. Let's see. If it is, we got Bob here. All right, 6ABC, the survey. The survey must be made by a registered professional land surveyor acceptable to the title company and buyer's lenders. Check 1 box only. So this box is who's going to pay for the survey, who's going to provide it. So within blank days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall furnish to buyer and title company seller's existing survey and a T47 affidavit. And the affidavit simply affirms, we haven't done anything during the time that we've lived here to invalidate the survey. Oh, we may have put in a pool and a shed and a fence, but there's a space on the affidavit for them to acknowledge any adjustments they've made to the property, and then they sign it and it gets notarized, okay? So the seller's gonna provide it. Now, there is a caveat here. If the existing survey or affidavit is not acceptable to the title company or buyer's lender, buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense or buyer's expense, and this is a point of negotiation, no later than 3 days prior to the closing date. And I've heard it argued both ways. A listing agent will say it's a buyer expense because it's their lender who's insisting on a new survey. The buyer's agent can say it's a seller expense because the survey that they provided is inadequate. Okay, who's right? It's an arm wrestling match, okay? Advocate for your client in a professional way. Put some sugar with it, but advocate. That's right, who wants it more? 2, within blank days after the effective date of the contract, buyer shall obtain a new survey at buyer's expense. So the buyer's getting it. Buyer is deemed to receive the survey on the date of actual receipt. 3, within blank days after the effective date, seller shall provide a new survey. Okay, so there we go. Seller's providing existing with an affidavit. Buyer's buying a new one. Seller's buying a new one.
What about for blank days?
So, I'm sorry? Yes.
They're up to 16 hours.
It's the title company who's going to order the survey. So I'd probably call the title company because they know which survey company they're going to call. So, and they'll know what typical turn times are. But yeah, you can check with them. So,
Just working the wise at number 1, you have a listing, be very careful to get that survey. If you have a survey, get it to both. It says in here, seller shall furnish buyer and title your existing survey. I've heard it multiple times where the listing agent didn't get the survey there within that timetable. Guess who gets to buy a new survey? Whether one will need it or not. The buyer said, no, I want to do it.
yes, yes,
Make sure they get it, that you're going to be the one responsible to get it to the title company and the listing agent.
yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
the buyer's agent.
That's a great point, Bob. Was there more information about survey you wanted to talk about? Okay.
We have another, you don't mind clarifying?
Yes. 6-8.
I don't know.
What page? Oh, here we go. The transfer fees?
No, 16, title, it says license.
Oh, the standard exception, printed exception. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, 6-8. I'm with you. So this is what I meant earlier when I said read a title policy or two. It'll help you to understand this contract. And what you'll see is in the title policy, it says, we're going to protect you, we're going to protect you, we're going to protect you, except if one of these things happens. Well, what are those things? It's this list right here. Discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in area or boundary lines, encroachments, protrusions, overlapping improvements. If any of these things happen, there is no insurance coverage. That's what the title policy says. Now, if either party, buyer or seller, is willing to pay an additional premium, 15% more than the standard insurance policy, the title policy, the title company will provide more coverage. They'll cover more things. Well, what will they cover? Everything on that list except shortages in area. So now with the additional premium, they'll defend discrepancies, conflicts, boundary lines, encroachments, protrusions, overlapping improvements. Any of those things happen, the title company jumps to the defense of the buyer, except shortages in area, and they will never cover that. Did that make sense? Kind of?
And then the commitment is something separate and different.
So the commitment is where the title company has done their initial work. You know, they've done their history. They've determined if there's any claims against the property, any mechanics liens or previous contracts, sale contracts that had not been released. They do all their research. And when they determine that we are going to be willing to issue an insurance policy, then they issue a commitment. So it's not the actual insurance policy, but it's saying to all parties, we've done our research. We promise you we will issue a title policy on this home with these exceptions. And I think it's paragraph C in the title policy where they identify anything that must be cleared up, must be resolved, or anything that they're going to exempt from coverage. That's, if anything, yes. Okay.
Sometimes you have variable issues and things that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So title commitment, then the title policy.
So if we choose, one will not be amended or deleted from the title policy, you're not, that's the normal one.
That's correct. That's correct. That's right. If you go with 8.2, somebody's going to pay a 15% premium to cover that additional cost. Okay. All right. Y'all had some good questions, Nancy.
I have another question because I wanted to dig in because I know it was me that provided this contract for my client that has that new construction property. But it's a new residential condominium contract. And in the opening, it says improvements, seller must commit to construction no later than both. And improvements will substantially be completed, document ready for occupancy not later than December 31st.
Okay.
And then it says about construction delays caused by acts of God, fire, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But then it says, but however, in no event may the time for substantial completion extend beyond the closing date.
Okay.
Seller may substitute materials, equipment, and appliances of comparable quality if they can't get the stuff.
So what's your question?
Because my client's been waiting like this.
No, what's your question?
So I'm wondering if my client is waiting.
So you're saying that the property is not complete
Right.
and the builder did not meet the deadline of December 31st. So I'm going to give you a very frustrating answer. You're going to have an attorney look at the contract. And I say that because even though what you read sounded very clear and that the builder was obligated to a December 31st deadline, I can't believe that's actually the case. And they have probably built some wiggle room in that deadline in other places in the contract. So I've just never seen a builder commit themselves to a hard and fast closing date.
It's just not been done.
Bob?
I was going back to the survey, just one more point. If your seller does not have an existing survey, make sure they don't check box.
Yes.
Seriously,
Yeah.
because I've seen that happen too, where they weren't able to provide one.
Yes.
And because they didn't have one, so we tend to just look at it and go, okay, well,
Yeah.
we don't have it.
So if the seller can't provide a survey, I mean, this is a document you want to ask for in advance. You know, when you send over the seller's disclosure, you say, oh, there are a few things I'm going to need from you. If you have the builder's list of amenities and upgrades that they put into your home, if you have a plot plan, you have a floor plan, a survey of the property. And if they say to you, we don't have a copy of the survey, ask when they purchased the home. And if it's been within the last 10 years, if they remember where they closed, they can probably call the title company and get a copy of that survey. So it's out there somewhere and you can generally get it. Yes.
This is document again that the buyer agent filled out.
Correct. Buyer's agent completes this.
In regards to that question, with that information, if the seller has a survey,
Yes.
would it be in the MLS?
Yes. So a good listing agent is going to get the survey prior to going on the market. They're going to upload the survey to the MLS along with the T47 affidavit. And that way the buyer's agent knows the seller has provided the survey. If it's a good listing agent, they provided the mud notice. That's correct.
It's a Frank Gray team.
So you said the HOA, and that's true. I agree with you. A good listing agent will provide that. But I do want to remind you what we saw earlier in the contract. It states if the buyer's concerned, they should use that form. It's kind of weird.
I have a question too. I ran into this. What is the standard procedure for, if there's a requirement to sell a condo for HOA docs?
Yes.
Is it common for the seller's agent to provide that? Or
So,
the title company?
so almost always the seller can get access to all the documents at no charge. Okay. In fact, I believe that's the law, and I believe they have to be available online.
You know what? I just paid for it
So
in
no.
August for my seller.
Oh, okay. Well, ask the
Because
seller.
title company wouldn't do it.
I believe the seller has a right to receive them for free. Now, there is something that's going to be required, which is a resale certificate. And they're always going to charge for that. And that resale certificate addresses a number of items. But basically the end result is the HOA has no claim against this property that would prevent it from transferring ownership. And the resale certificate also discloses whether the HOA is being sued by anybody, which would be of interest to the buyer because they might assume that liability after ownership. Okay. Yeah, and so they're always going to charge for the resale certificate. As long as the title company thinks it's valid for. And I have seen title companies accept surveys that were 20 years old. 15 years? Yeah. So there's no hard and fast rule. And it's really going to depend on the nature of the property. Again, if it's a subdivision lot and they're cookie cutters, they're going to have a long time on it. If it's a unique property and there's a lot of development going on, probably not going to take a very old one.
I had one where they had a survey, 12 years old or so, they put in a pool and a fence. And the title company said, just draw in where that pool is.
Yes.
And draw where the fence line, and it flew.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, different strokes. Okay. You guys are doing good. We have a few minutes here. What is one other buyer doc you would like to look at? Do you want to look at the third party? Oh, that's a great one. Let's look at the third party. By the way, in a week or two, I'm going to offer a class. It's called Contract Mastery Quiz. I would encourage you to show up for that. This is buyer docs. I think next week we're going to teach on seller docs. And then late next week, we're going to do this contract mastery quiz. I'm probably going to put together like 50 questions, and it's a learning experience. I'm not going to report you to Trek or anything, but we're going to test your knowledge of these documents, and then we'll go over the test as a group. But it will be the real issues that agents tend to trip up on. So watch for that. I think it'll be helpful to you if you come for that. Let's see here. I want to go to hr.com. I don't know why this is not cooperating with me. Let's do it the old-fashioned way. Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I don't show it up here. So I got Trek. Let me just type in har.com and see if it will pull up a link to it. There we go. And let's see if I'm logged in as a realtor. I am. Oh, Bob is. There we go. That's the problem. It's Bob. We don't want listings. Let me get rid of this for just a moment. We want to go to, yeah, what I'm trying to look for is the forms, and Bob's is all messed up. So let's go here. Look at this, forms. There it is. I'm doing it the hard way. I like my water in a dirty glass. There you go. All right. So let's look at the third party. Y'all should get like a bonus CE on this because I'm not giving you a break. Probably the pizza arrive at 1 o'clock. All right, here we go. Third party financing addendum. Is this what you use when the seller's providing financing? Oh, that would be a seller financing addendum. Third party is, this is not the buyer or the seller. This is somebody else providing financing. So first thing you do, Jackson Henry. There we go. If you forget the order, it's right there on the wall. By the way, I learned last night that Jackson Henry is coming to town on Friday. So there may be an inspection. I don't know, but he's 6. He's 6, and Molly Kate is 4, and we now have a third one, Ava Lee, who's about 6 months. So they surprised us last night, said they're going to come in on Friday. So I did. Molly Kate Media. We shut it down last year. It was a photography, videography company for agents, but it was just never profitable. And if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable. So we let it go. All right, third-party financing addendum. First of all, you put in the address of the property, then you indicate the types of financing you're going to apply for. And this is a little-known fact. Many agents think you can only check one type of financing. But let me read this to you, as I've had to read it to other agents who objected when I submitted multiple checks. Listen, buyer shall apply promptly for all financing described below. So they may want to keep their options open. For example, they may think they only qualify for FHA, but they might be able to move a little bit of money around, or there might be a special conventional program, so they can check both conventional and FHA. That is perfectly acceptable. Any options they want to explore, you can check as many as you want. There is no limitation. Paragraph 2. Approval of financing. Approval for the financing described above will be deemed to have been obtained when buyer approval and property approval are obtained. Don't skip over that. How many approvals are there? 2. Buyer approval and property approval. And they are completely separate issues. Okay, so let's look at the first one, buyer approval. This contract is subject to buyer obtaining buyer approval. If buyer cannot obtain buyer approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller within blank days after the effective date of this contract, and this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. If buyer does not terminate the contract under this provision, the contract shall no longer be subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. Buyer approval will be deemed to have been obtained when the terms of the loan described above are available and lender determines that buyer has satisfied all the lender's requirement related to buyer's assets, income, and credit history. What's a typical buyer approval period? 21 days. Could be 25 days, could be 18 days, 15 days. 21 is typical. So this means that if the buyer gets approval within 21 days, they satisfy this requirement. What if you're the buyer's agent? It's day 19. You don't have buyer approval yet. You call who to talk about this?
Lender.
Call the lender. Say, what's up? And the lender says, yeah, thank you. Well, we've had trouble getting an appraiser out to the property. Okay, we're thinking another couple of days they'll be out. We'll have the report a couple of days after that. Depending on that, maybe we can get buyer approval. Actually, I just gave you a terrible example. Scratch that whole discussion. Scratch that, because that's a property approval issue. Buyer approval. Okay, day 19 of 21. We're still waiting for the buyer's employer to complete the verification of employment form, or we're waiting on the IRS to provide registered copies of their return. We expect them within a few days. What should you do as the buyer's agent? Communicate with whom?
I would call my client now and say, hey, we're still waiting on the information from your boss. Maybe you can give them a call, kind of like fire under them.
Great, all that's good. Now, let's say you communicate to the listing agent, say, hey, I know we only got a couple days left, but it looks like it's going to be another 5 or 6 days until we get buyer approval. Buyer still wants to buy the property. And the listing agent says, you know what? It's no problem. No problem. Seller's not in a big rush. We're still going to meet our closing date. Don't worry about it. Should you put your pillow down on your... What do you need? Thank you, Jeanette. You need an addendum extending the time period for buyer approval. Because guess what? If you don't get it and the buyer goes past the 21, the seller, and say they don't get loan approval, that seller is keeping the earnest money deposit, okay? Or even if the buyer does get approval, say on day 25 or day 26, they're still in default. And the seller, if they get a better offer, they could cause a ruckus about that. I'm not saying they win, but they have a cause of action there, okay? So never trust somebody's good intentions. Always let the contract rule. And if you need to get an extension, do that. Whose responsibility is it to monitor these dates? Option period date, delivery dates, financing dates. That's exactly you as the buyer's representative. And technically it's the buyer's responsibility, but they've hired you as their agent. Agent literally means a representative of another.
It does say time is of the essence.
That's right. That's right. That mean it. And that means the seller doesn't have to cooperate. What literally happens if the buyer doesn't get approval by that date, when it says time is of the essence, it means that after that, there's now no more right of cancellation on behalf of the buyer. If they end up not getting final approval, they can't cancel and get their earnest money back. The seller's going to get it. That's what time of the essence means. Robin is eating our pizza. You eating our pizza, Robin? Okay, thank you. All right, guys, y'all did great. I can't believe it's been 3 hours, can you? Let's do this again soon. We'll do seller docs next week, and then we'll do our contracts mastery quiz. Has everybody signed the roster? David, we'll get your autograph. Okay, all right. Y'all go enjoy some pizza. If you want to make a donation towards the cost, and 100% of this will be given to the orphanage in Uganda, throw it on the counter in there, do something to make it known, and we'll pick it up and get it turned in. Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all joining us online. She's doing great. I had lunch with her last week.